Hello and welcome to the No Bullshit Property Podcast brought to you by Cert Property. I'm Howard.
And I'm Paul.
And today we're welcoming Gary Stewart from Otto to discuss the challenges of commercial utility prices on businesses, landlords and everything in between. Before we get started, just a quick reminder to check out our previous episodes to give you an insight into our approach to transformative property management and how we're building the sustainable communities of the future. So, before we get into the episode, usual bit of market news and updates. So, Paul, what have you got for us?
Absolutely. So the buy-to-let lender Aldermore has named Manchester as the best city for landlords to invest in. This is based on 5 key factors: average rent, yield, long-term growth, lowest number of vacancies versus stock, percentage of the city's population in the rental market. Manchester comes out on top. We've got a 6.5% annual property growth, 32% of private renters compared to a UK average of 23%. So buy-to-let continues to provide a very good investment for landlords.
Yep. Well, the evidence is all around us. You know, we keep seeing activity and investment coming into the city, so makes sense.
And then Bidwell's have released their build-to-rent operating report, February 2024. Manchester, unsurprisingly, is the city with the most build-to-rent homes outside London. So we've talked about this quite a lot on the last few episodes. Just interestingly, Salford has 28% more renters than 10 years ago, Manchester 17.5%, Liverpool 14.2%, and Leeds 14.1%.
Yeah, I think in that report, it was interesting to see that Salford actually has the most built-to-rent homes, even above Manchester, which was an interesting little quirk. But combined, the Manchester-Salford conurbation, by far the largest outside of London. And again, all that investment coming in here, demonstrating, the continued attractiveness of the city.
I also thought it was interesting how Salford and Trafford were now very close in rent levels to Manchester city centre. Yeah,
it shows that ripple out effect is happening. The city centre rents have grown so much, and they're starting to now spread out into the peripheries of the city centre, and like you say, boroughs like Trafford and Salford.
Build to rent has delivered 19% of total dwellings over the last 10 years, so again demonstrating the growth. And I thought it was quite interesting in the report. They talk a lot about home views and how that is really leading the reputational brand of these assets. And it's something that investors are looking at, funders are looking at, and tenants are looking at. So everything has a home view score out of 5, and the report does compare a lot of the leading assets across the city.
So there's a correlation between home view score and rents you're achieving.
Absolutely.
Yeah, interesting. Well, thank you for joining us, Gary. Do you want to start off by telling us a little bit about Otto, what your company does, and then, we'll get into some questions about utilities.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me today. It's been a pleasure. So my background is actually 13 years as a financial advisor, and that's where the company was originally born, out the back of, essentially. So when we were working with investors and developers on their sites, it would come up as a problem multiple times that it would be the aggro of having to deal with commercial buildings and utilities, either the infrastructure setting them up, or ultimately the facilitation of the actual contracts at the back end of them. So we started doing them in-house as a brokerage, mortgage brokerage that is. And then ultimately, over a number of years, we realized that actually this is a really needed service in the investor and developers world, and it wasn't really being facilitated, not in the correct way as we saw it anyway. So that's how we basically started to blossom it. We started with investors and developers, and we went into landlords, and we do portfolio management now. We work with the likes of yourselves at Cert to basically kind of like take away the stress and the aggro and everything else that comes along with it. Because you guys know it's a real pain in the ass when
Yes. Paul's now head of utilities. It's his favorite role.
I think it's interesting, isn't it? Because I think when the utility prices went up, which will be a couple of years ago now, it kind of put a lot of focus then on the importance of the tariffs, and maybe sometimes previous to that, you kind of just rolled into them, didn't you? And then suddenly it became such a massive cost for a business. So it's now something that's such an important event. in the cycle of a building, and likewise for your residential homes and everything.
It's interesting, isn't it, that, probably 5 years ago, 6 years ago, no one even paid attention to
Didn't bat an eyelid.
what the cost of utilities were, what the electricity cost was going to be, etc. And now it's one of the first things that people think about, obviously, because of the prices rising so dramatically.
I mean, you put it quite eloquently, but when those prices went up in 2022, they didn't just go up a little bit. They were going up, 300%, 400%, 500%, and it was astronomical. And obviously for businesses, you don't have such a thing as a price cap like you do in residential. So when the government stepped in to protect domestic, basically all the businesses, landlords, and everything, they were like, well, hey, what about us? And why aren't we going to get protected? And they did to a certain degree. And, it was a really good package that they put out, but then they really tapered it back to only certain businesses, certain sectors. So then you had businesses masquerading that they did certain other operations just so that they could get levies in. But those costs crippled businesses when that, went up. And there's still a lot of clients now coming out of the back of those super low rates because, we'll speak to businesses today and they're still on, say, a contract from 2019, 2020. They haven't felt the effect of today's rates yet. And they're like, no, we're okay. We're fine. Thanks. And then it's like, and they're like, oh shit, that is not pretty. There's a 300% increase for the business or, build to rent scheme. And I'm like, Jesus Christ.
Exactly. Well, it's interesting. A lot of build to rents, but probably more so PBSA, is typically build inclusive. And we saw the market starting to move towards that more so in build to rent. Like I say, PBSA has long been that model. And then that utilities price rise happened. And, whilst the sort of convenience message was a big sell, people, I think, now have sort of stepped back a little bit from it because they're a little bit concerned about taking that risk. So I think it stopped in its tracks, the evolution of a market, which I think will ultimately evolve in that way. I think, we will start to see more people in build to rent looking at build inclusive models, but I think, it just put a bit of a pause on it and understandably so.
Like you said, it brought a magnifying glass on it even more so, because if you take the property that you've got in Liverpool, for example, that was crazy consumption in lots of different areas. And they had a really old system in terms of, the red, green, amber traffic light system that they had on the energy, which is a really old sort of setup. But
also, what's that system? Sorry.
So it's, typically you have off-peak and on-peak charging time. So you might have, say, during the times of midnight through to 7 a.m., it's a super low rate because it's quite off-peak. And then from 7 a.m. through to 12, basically, it's a higher rate. That's your day rate. On the building that you manage in Liverpool, they actually had a 3-tiered system. So it basically, like, green was like your super off peak, amber was like your day rate, and then red was basically like your worst rate you could imagine. Now that building was actually using majority of their energy in the red.
Right.
And it wasn't until those energy rates went through the roof that they were like, what's going on here?
I think it was that evidenced in that, but it also put a lot of focus on where you're wasting energy. And that building in particular is heavy on software tenants. So they had servers and things on all night long. So it did kind of put a lot of emphasis on that and really highlight to tenants as well, which I think is a good thing about being more energy efficient.
So what, that was an example of an outdated system being an issue. What can landlords, businesses, what should they be doing to, optimize their utilities? What's the solutions?
I think that's going to come down to the age of the building and what's feasible and possible versus, return versus investment. Because if you've got a relatively, let's call it a new build to rent scheme property, and let's say it's only, 5 or 6 years old, it wasn't built with obviously energy prices in today's mind, but it's still a new building in today's world. So you think, well, I don't really want to spend much money on it because if I've already just built it, basically. So something like that, you could look to do retrospective solar panels, for example, on the building, because when that was probably designed and built, it was probably done with like the minimum requirements just to get it through for today's building regulations. So you could do retrospective solar panels, and battery storage could be an option. And then, if you look at older buildings as well, you've then got the question of, is it, grade 2 listed or anything like that? Then you're restricted on certain permissions, what you can actually do with it. So, but I mean, other things that you can look at is, your classic one really, which is insulation. you can look at having, say, double door systems. So, I'll probably say over 50% of heat loss in the building is down to entry and exit doors, basically. So if you go and put in a double door system, you're minimizing that escape of heat. And then you could have the HVAC systems upgraded in the building to make it more efficient in that respect. You go around checking the windows in terms of like, the seals corrupt. So a lot of the times the rubber around the seal of the windows, they perish over years.
Yeah.
So a lot of people don't even think about that, to be fair. But there's
Some
lots
simple, quick wins there, at least. Yeah. And what's your business doing to help with utilities? What's your solution?
I mean, ultimately, the cheapest energy is the ones that you don't use, right? So we can try and help businesses use as little as possible. There is a way that you can basically do an investigation into where your energy is going. And you know how you have smart meters and it'll analyze and tell you, how much energy you're using. There's sort of a layer on top of that. You can have what we call it a super smart meter, if you like. So essentially it's a unit attached on top of your meter. What that does is it basically connects to the electricity board, and then it monitors where the usage is going in all the different parts of the building. So essentially over a period of months, you can get an itemized report and you can see exactly where the energy consumption is going. Like we had a science park, for example, and they were spending money on energy like you wouldn't believe. And when we installed the super smart meter, basically on top of what they're currently doing, which is not massively expensive. We can do it on a subscription model basis. And I think it's about £120 a month, give or take. Depends on the size of the site. But essentially what that then produced for them is they established that they had, I think it was 3 or 4 refrigerators, like walk-in size, that were being left on 24/7. There was nothing in them, but they didn't realize that they were on all the time. So that's one instance.
Yeah.
We had another instance with a large hotel. They couldn't understand why their gas usage was absolutely through the roof. And actually what it turned out to be was it was the kitchen staff, waiters and waitresses. They were cooking and prepping their meal after basically the kitchen had closed. So every single night, basically, they would turn on these massive gas hobs using loads of electric, the extractor fans, a whole shebang. But obviously they weren't selling any food. They were just prepping their own stuff.
Yeah.
And, compounded over the year, that's actually quite a lot of energy that's being used. So doing analysis through that way of super smart meters, you can then sort of itemize, say, right, okay, do we have just pure wastage without having to spend money on investment for the building?
Yeah.
Before we can just go and see, can we reduce the consumption?
Yeah.
And how do you get a super smart meter?
Contacting us.
Nice plug.
Yeah, it's not massively different in terms of getting a standard smart meter. Essentially, it is a bespoke piece of kit that is done. Then the cost of it comes down to how many meters do you have on the building, basically. So it's a subscription that can be done per meter. They come out, they install a super smart meter on top of your current meter, and that will analyze the data that's going through that meter. So we always recommend you have one per meter, basically, to analyze, because if you can spend, say, £150 per meter to establish where the wastage is, that's a hell of a lot more cost effective than actually go and doing, say, a whole building retrofit, a couple $100,000. So it's easier to do it that way.
And are there any grants available or government incentives to do these works to buildings?
Coincidentally, and you might say it's a bit of a conspiracy, all the grants stopped just before the energy went through the roof.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
Right.
So at the moment, as it currently stands, there are not really any grants available for businesses, which is really disappointing. And we wish, because if you look at it as well, in one hand, the government is saying, well, by 2028, we want commercial buildings to be EPC C, and then by 2030, we want them to be EPC B. They're like business saying, cool, what are you going to do to help us? Because that is significant investment.
Yeah.
So, but I don't know if you're aware, the EPCs, as they stand currently today, they're actually being reformed on how they're graded.
Yeah.
So that will hopefully come in by 2026.
Yeah.
So a lot of businesses, and domestic for that matter, they're like, why would we do anything now when we could move up an EPC band without doing anything? Because they're going to change them. So a D become a C.
Well, are they reforming them in a way? That sounds like they're reforming them in a way that might make it easier to get a higher.
We don't know which
score.
way
We don't know. There's no visibility.
Example, if you're currently a C, and they reform it in your favor, you become a B.
Yeah.
If it's not in your favor, then you become a D.
Yeah. It doesn't feel like something that's going to get reformed to make it easier to
I
hit
was gonna
the
say,
target,
on
though,
a
does it?
probability scale.
Yeah. Yeah. Probably tougher. Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
It'll be interesting to see because, I mean, for let's say PRS, a private renters sector, they're looking at saying you're going to have to spend minimum 15 grand.
yeah.
And then it might be 10 actually, because they haven't quite rubber stamped it yet. But, and then they're thinking about making that council tax band attached as well.
Yeah.
Because also, if you take a property up in, say, Newcastle, it's going to be what, 100 grand? If you take a property down in London, that's $1 million. Huge difference.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, in comparison to the value, and it's the same on commercial buildings as well.
Yeah. It will be interesting to see how it all plays out. Like you say, the government is imposing these minimum EPC ratings. What support actually will come, if any? I mean, on the residential side, if there's the minimum EPC ratings, how will the mortgage market respond to that? Will a property then be unmortgageable for a buy-to-let mortgage if you haven't got the minimum EPC rating? When something similar has happened, albeit different because it's, putting lives at risk with the cladding and combustible materials, obviously there's huge swathes of properties that became unmortgageable because the buildings weren't compliant. So is that going to happen here? And if so, is the government going to step in and support with grants or whatever?
And what happens to the buildings where you can't improve the energy efficiency?
Yeah.
Is there an exception for that?
I mean, the minimum EPC on residential is for rental properties only, as I understand it. So I guess it's a bit less of a tight noose in that, well, you could probably still sell it to someone as an owner occupier. But as we know, a lot of properties in the major cities are bought as investments and rented out. So it feels like there should be more government support. I mean, what do you think in terms of like what would be the best way for the government to support and intervene on either for residential landlords and investors and for commercial owners and businesses?
I mean, what you've got to take into consideration as well is you've got some landlords with, say, 4 or 5 properties, and then you've got some landlords with 300 to 500 properties.
Yeah.
So for them, they're like, where do you think this money is coming from?
Yeah.
We're just going to magic it out of our back pockets.
Yeah.
In conjunction with all the other things that you've laboured on top of us.
Yeah.
Tax changes.
Yeah.
Renters' right bill.
Yeah.
Everything else like that. They're like, you've stripped everything out that there is, basically. They're almost like forcing the small landlords out to say, see you later.
Yeah.
But where do I think it's going to go in terms of funding, grants and availability? And it's a difficult one, really, because in one hand, if you look at Ed Miliband, he is pushing left, right and centre and spending ludicrous amounts of money on going green, clean energy, spending billions. So they're hell-bent on going for it and making, sure that they're going to meet those requirements. I think that they might take the foot off the accelerator a little bit in terms of either the timeline or what they want to achieve in terms of like the banding. That I think is personally unrealistic what they're asking.
Yeah.
So something that I can pass comment on, it's a project that we're working on in the background. So with my mortgage broker background, we work with a lot of the lenders already in our other business. And we've been working with a data company, but at the same token, who are an aggregator for the lenders that look after their security, risk and reward. So we've been saying to them, look, these EPCs are going to become a huge problem when they do come in. But then from a lender's point of view, so lenders have to meet certain requirements. Let's say 25% of their portfolio of lending has to be within this EPC bandwidth. So what happens to the lenders' portfolios from government when 55% of their portfolio falls into that basket because you've just changed all the EPCs?
Yeah.
So what I've made as a suggestion and saying, I think how this might work in favor of, let's say, for example, you get a buy-to-let mortgage and it's 75% loan to value. So, well, why don't you do a retrospective package on the top of the back of it saying you can have another 5% loan, which is then given to you and it goes towards
upgrades,
regeneration of the property.
Yeah.
And then also as well, because currently you get it now, for example, with the interest rates, a lot of lenders have an EPC set of interest rates that you can get. So say you come on this interest rate, say 5%, Then once you've done your upgrade, which we pay for, basically, you just need to evidence it. Then once you've done that, we'll then give you access to the lower rates that you can go onto straight away. So then they're incentivized to do it. Because at the minute, landlords are like, what incentive is there? There's none.
Yeah.
So they've got to make it a win-win. And this is what I've been saying to the data company, because the data company like, well, we can't see what the landlords are saying because we don't work with them. We work with the lenders and they're just numbers. And I was like, you need the sentiment from the landlord, like what they're thinking, because you probably know as well as I do that they're offloading in the droves because they're like, where's the margin?
Yeah. No, interesting times ahead for sure. Yeah. Where do you see it going with all of that? I mean, touched on it there with the lenders, some of the suggestions you made there. Do you see it going that way? I was thinking a lender's going to stop lending to properties depending on EPC ratings. Is it going to be as severe as that in your view?
No. I mean, if you think about it fundamentally, banks at the end of the day, they are sales companies. They need to sell mortgages to make money. So they're never going to want to stop lending. If you want to liken it, we're not in 2008 position where the banks are collapsing. We're actually kind of in the polar opposite. Banks have got money. They just don't know how or where to lend it, essentially. And that's what they're taking direction on. But also as well, they're going at it from a cautious approach on how do we do this? Because they want to lend money, because we've got lenders saying, right, we've got X amount block of funds. We need to get it out. What deals have you got that we can do, for example? So they are actually fighting over business in the background, but they're also making sure that they're trying to tick the boxes along the way as well.
Yeah.
So it's really interesting to see how they're trying to play out. But also as well, you've got this reservation from lenders. They're like, we want to do this, but we don't know what the requirements are going to be by the government, because they're saying we're going to change them, but we're not going to tell you what they are.
Yeah.
So it leaves you in this horrible limbo land where you're like, do we do stuff now? Do we wait? Because you've got, I'd say, like from landlords that we work with and the different property management companies, you've probably got two different camps. You've got the ones that are like, yep, let's just get it done now. Like, for example, you've got a pension company and they've got 244 HMOs and they just went ahead and they said, we're going to get it done now because we know this is going to come and it's going to happen. But we know that we can make savings today by getting that installed rather than waiting until 2 years' time.
Yeah.
So you've got the ones that will be proactive and will just say, just do it now, and then it's done. And then you've got the other ones that are like, no, we'll wait. We'll see what happens. We'll wait until basically we have to do something. So you've got two different sides. It depends which side you're sitting.
And it depends how much free capital you've got to make those investments and upgrades.
There's
as
a lot
well,
of
doesn't it?
buts and maybes.
Yeah.
The capital's a massive one, obviously.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because you've also got the other side that are like, we won't do anything unless it's incentivized or unless we have to do it. And, you've got other problems as well. Let's say, for example, blocks of apartments. If you've got a landlord with, say, 5 apartments in a block of 20, well, you can't just go and upgrade 5. You've technically got to upgrade the whole building. You can't just clad your 5 apartments on the outside with double insulation. It's looking weird. So, it's really difficult when it comes to apartments as well. So again, what's the guidelines for that? How do you address that? Then obviously that's go into the freehold fund. What's in there? A lot of them are dry.
Yeah, exactly.
And a lot of people don't want the service charge going up any more than it already has.
No.
So so many headwinds.
And then that puts pressure again on mortgage lending, because some lenders won't lend if service charges are too high. So and it kind of comes back to, like I said before, parallel with the cladding scenario, where ultimately the government has had to step in and intervene to sort this out for
how
lots
slow
of people.
that is.
Yeah, and that takes its time as well. Yeah. Never dull. Very good. So what's in the future for you and your business?
So I'd probably say it's something that we find that massively benefit clients at the minute. And, it feeds into what you guys do at SIR, which is the management side of things, is taking away that stress and anxiety and, I guess, time consumption of actually managing the property. It's one step less that they have to do throughout the process. So what we've done or built as a system is we've got our auction energy platform that we've got for businesses, essentially. So you come to us with your energy bundle, essentially. And the easiest way I describe it is basically like eBay for energy is what we've kind of built. So we plug into the back of all the major suppliers. Essentially, what we do is we take that energy bundle, we put it onto our auction platform, say it goes live on a Monday, and then all the suppliers have access to that they basically submit their best bid, but if they're interested, like, you can say if it's a really big building, they'll obviously go in like quite competitively. The good thing is, like, during the course of that 5 days, so it closes on a Friday, each supplier can see the other contending bids.
Oh, right.
So if they want to recompete for that piece of business, say it's, like a large site like the one in Liverpool, then they'll re-enter another bid, basically. So ultimately, by the end of the week, we then close down an auction, produce all the results in the report, present it to the client, and say, here you go, here's all your options, and then compete against each other. Whereas your typical, let's say, energy broker, they might just go and pick rates off the shelf from different suppliers, say, right, we've got here from British Gas, we've got here from Octopus, we've got here from EDF. Those suppliers in the background have got no idea what the other ones have done, so they don't know if they're close, a million miles out or anything. So ultimately, doing the auction style, the client is the one that wins in all of that, basically, because they're getting competing bids for their energy bundle, essentially. So that for us is a massive win-win situation.
Yeah, very good.
But also as well, from a management point of view, we basically contact the client, I'd say typically 3 to 6 months before their contract's due to come up, and we say, hey, your contract's due up. Or if you've got multiple sites, then we can do what we call a basket of energy. We can lump it all together, get consolidated, and just take away that stress and anxiety, because it's always that, oh, sure, that's coming around.
The last thing anyone wants to be bothered with is dealing with utility contract renewals.
Oh, yeah. I love it.
Very good. Very good. Well, yeah, I mean, you start talking about a topic of utilities and thinking, it's a bit dry and it's not something super
sexy subject.
Well, actually, it's, as we just said, it's very relevant. Every business out there, and we sat in central Manchester here, and lots of food and beverage businesses out of our window. Everyone's felt the pressure of it in a business sense and a personal sense. So it's a really important topic, and certainly, what we've just been talking about, looking into the future, only going to increase in its importance and people having visibility on it. So,
things that you can't control. And, this is because we get a lot of questions. Well, I say the most popular question we probably get is like, where do you see energy rates going? Because obviously at the minute they're very elevated. And a lot of clients will say to us, do you think they're ever going to go back to where they were before? And I say often to them, look, you might as well write those rates on a gravestone. They're probably never coming back to life again. As much as I'd love them to, this is just probably not going to happen. Basically, I would say you're not a million miles off. The energy rates have followed the same trajectory as interest rates for banks. They've basically gone up in line almost, and they're probably never going to go back. They might go down a bit, but they probably won't go back down to what they were pre-energy crisis, if you like, essentially. And then going forwards, clients will say, should I take a 12, like a 1 year, a 2 year, a 3 year, 4, 5? I say, look, depending on how long you're probably going to be in the building also as well, but also your appetite to risk. Because if you'd have said to me in 2022, how long should I take? You say, God, I only want to be on this contract for 1 year. This is awful. But if I'd give you that option back in 21, know what you do now, you said, God, take 5 years. So you don't know, and it's your risk to appetite as a business, but you can't control things geopolitically. That's what basically influences. So like
absolutely,
Russian invasion, the Middle East conflict, Saudi oil, American oil, the, let's say, torpedoing of the gas line that went underneath the ocean. Still a bit of a taboo who actually did that. Probably 2 guesses who did it. So, things like that, you just never know. And overnight, those things happened. And with energy contracts, you only get literally the day to secure the contract. If you then reply in the morning and say, I want to go ahead, it's gone.
Things have changed.
You have to do it to take it there and then. So it's what's your appetite to risk, and you have to make that judgment call.
No, very good. Very good.
It's mad, isn't it? We live in such a fast moving world. All of a sudden.
It feels like all of a sudden everything seemed to be a little bit calmer and a little bit slower 5 years ago. But everything.
It's coming back to what we started with, isn't it? When it becomes such a big cost, then you kind of unearth all these things underneath. Who would have ever thought 10 years ago about things like that happening, impacting your energy rates? Or
who would have thought energy rates cost what they do today 10 years ago? Because I think what they were like, say in, let's say 2020, that's probably when they were like peak good. You were looking at, say, 11, 12, 13p per kilowatt on electric. Today, you're averaging 25 to 30p. It's a huge increase. Huge. And if you're, let's say, a heavy electric business or a heavy gas business, either or, we've got a company that's a waste incinerator facility, they go through gaps like you wouldn't believe, because that is their business, to burn stuff basically. And see their costs, I think it's like 460% they've gone up.
Wow.
And you can't just pass those on. You have to absorb probably bulk of those in bakeries and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Manufacturing,
Yeah.
other big ones, build to rent schemes, HMOs.
Absorbing those costs plus the costs of salary increases, rental increases, everything else. So yeah.
So every little helps. Anywhere that you can try and, minimize those expenditures and drill them down.
Yeah.
Likes of using, like, say, the energy auction platform that we've got. It's just another area where you can try and minimize that damage to a certain degree, because obviously ultimately it's going to affect your bottom line, is it?
Yeah.
That's what you're trying to make as healthy as possible.
Yeah, exactly. Interesting.
Yeah,
Very
really
good.
insightful. Thank you.
Very insightful. Yeah, thank you for coming on the episode, Gary. And really actually enthused about energy and utilities after all of that.
Have changed your mind to it being a sexy subject?
I think you might have been. I mean, we have make planning sexy, so now we've got
Yes.
make utilities sexy. There we go.
Yes. that could be the title of the episode.
There we go. Nailed it. Super. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Cheers. Just a quick reminder to check out our previous episodes to give you an insight into our approach to transformative property management and how we're building the sustainable communities of the future.